Thank you for joining us today to explore the concept of resilience. I suspect that many of you out there have had to dip into your reserves of resilience over the past few months, or even feeling a little unsettled. Yes, I'm talking to some of you working from home parents like me, but also it's feeling uncertain or unsettled in these professional and personal times. Add in the social disruption and the upcoming election, and it's clear that these extraordinary times call for strength of character and conviction. At ARA, we strive to propagate the tools and support needed to meet these challenges head on. We do this on dual fronts by helping businesses bolster the numbers and influence of women working and advancing in technology roles, while also helping women navigate IT careers and challenges. In the recent months, ARA's focus has turned to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And today's conversation will be no different. We've invited 4 change makers and thought leaders to share with us the road to inclusivity is paved with resilience. We'll explore the topic through the lenses of psychology, of community, and of personal accountability. Our intention is to generate action-based ideas around doing the tough work now to create change and to develop equality for generations to come. I'm thrilled to welcome our guest speaker and our panelists. Dr. Moira Mulhern, Executive Director and co-founder of Turning Point, the Center for Hope and Healing at the University of Kansas Hospital. Melissa Donaldson, Senior Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer for Wintrust Financial Corporation. Aravinda Kilaru, Senior Director, IT Services, Operations Management at Foot Locker, and Leo Sheridan, President and CEO, Advanced Group, and Chairman for the American Staffing Association. Moderating our panel today is my ARA co-founder, Leslie Vickrey. Thank you all for being here. Let's get started with some opening remarks from Dr. Moira Mulhern, a highly regarded psychologist who has been studying resilience for over 25 years. She is a leader in the field and, as Leo will certainly attest, is a fantastic speaker and a visionary. She is here today to share insights from her work at the University of Kansas Health System, particularly in the Turning Point Center of Hope and Feeling. She co-created the 10 facets of resilience theory, a philosophy that is designed to help manage stress, cultivate optimism, remain hopeful, and more. And it's certainly a useful framework for our current times. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Mulhern.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is great to be here. And I'm getting ready to share my screen. So it's great to be here as part of this panel. I'm looking forward to the speakers on the panel. But first, I wanted to talk to you all a little bit about resilience and the resilience model that we use. So I'm starting with this quote from Lawrence Matthews about self-differentiation. And I'm using this because I think it is the foundation for the marathon of inclusivity and everything else that we do. So when you read this quote, it's not about being obstinate or digging your heels in. It's about calm, clear thinking, staying in your own lane, being an example of your values and your guiding principles. And I'm a big fan of everyone examining their values and guiding principles. All companies have values and guiding principles, but I'm talking about your personal guiding principles because those are the things that guide your behavior and decisions. And you probably have them, but my question to you is, can you articulate them? And so we're calling this self-differentiation. This is something we should be working on every day. because if you're not striving to get better, then you're going backwards. So this is something I'm going to be working on until the day that I die. And I really believe that this is how we break through barriers that we thought in the past were unbreakable. And how do you do that? Well, imagine a scale of functioning, the scale of human functioning, okay? So at the low end of the scale are individuals who are shooting each other at parties, getting into a lot of trouble, ending up in prison. And as you go up the scale of functioning, the behavior improves. So they stop shooting each other, then maybe people are getting in fist fights, and that's pretty low functioning behavior. But as you go up the scale, the behavior gets better and better until you get to the high end of the scale, which is where those highly differentiated, those self-defined people live. And when you're at that high end of the functioning scale, you know the difference between thinking and feeling. We all have feelings and they're always going to be a part of our world, but you understand the difference between thinking and feeling, and you're able to move more from a thinking place than an emotionally reactive feeling place, and you're better able to self-regulate. So how do you do this most of the time? It's these 10 facets of resilience. And here's where you start. These are the characteristics, I've been calling them the characteristics of resilience, but what I've discovered over the years is these are really also the characteristics of self-defined people. So, over 25, almost 30 years ago, when I was in graduate school and studying resilience, I came across Emmy Werner's work, and Emmy Werner is the one who in psychology gets the credit for, starting this resilience movement and studying resilience. And she was studying behaviors, and she did a really great study because she followed people from birth into adulthood. And she found that the resilient people had certain behaviors. They were able to delay gratification. They were high achievers. They were inner directed. They had good reasoning ability. But when I read that, what I was curious about is what are the characteristics that you have to have in order to display those behaviors? And that's what led me and a team to study the characteristics of resilient people, and led us to the research, which this model is adapted from that research that I was involved in graduate school. So I was teaching this model, teaching it out in the community, and it was working. It works really well. So we know from the data that we've collected that it lowers anxiety, depression, and distress at a highly significant level. And we also know from our data that it improves resilience in healthcare workers and probably everybody else. But there was something missing. I kept seeing some people would make these exponential changes in their lives, and others were not able to do that. And I wondered what the missing piece was. So then about 10, 12 years ago, I discovered the missing piece, and it's systems. And it's systems thinking. So, which led me to start looking beyond the individual characteristics and into our environments, our systems, and how those systems around us affect us and how we affect those systems. And the systems I'm talking about is your family, your work, it's school, it's community organizations you might be involved in, your religious affiliation, even the government. So those are the systems that I started looking at. And when I started looking at these systems and how the systems affected us and we affected them, I started to see the world in a much more interconnected way. So for instance, I've studied emotions for decades. And now I see that these individual emotions create an emotional undercurrent in every environment that we exist in. And so we are contributing to the emotional undercurrent in our environments, and that emotional undercurrent can be contributing to us. And once you see this, you see that there is a social and emotional undercurrent in all systems, then you're not blindsided by what's going on, by the emotional drama and the conflict. You're not blindsided by it, because once you see it, you can't unsee it, and you expect it and you accept it. So when we start paying attention, we do navigate our environments in an entirely different way. And like I said, we understand the drama, we can predict it, we can see it, and we learn in the conflict, and we can learn to navigate it better. So that's pretty big, right? And kind of 30,000 feet. And, you guys have other important work to do. So where do you start? Well, you start with yourself. You start with self-awareness. You start with self-reflection, knowing where your vulnerabilities are. We know that great leaders and high performers know where their vulnerabilities are, and they work on them so that they can navigate and contribute to their environments in a more thoughtful, self-defined way. So, and these 10 facets that I have been calling resilience is your roadmap. These are all the things, if you look at these things, you can see that if you can do all of those things, you're going to be able to handle whatever comes your way. And especially now when we're thriving through difficult times. So COVID, it's a chronic stressor, and all of the stressors that go along with it, and that long haul of awareness of diversity and inclusivity. This is the time where we really need to focus on these skills and learn them if you don't have them, ramp them up if you do have them. And so the clinical staff, we've been offering these programs at the hospital for 8 years, and the clinical staff is just eating these up, because the higher the stress in your job, the more you need to be working on these. So when I joined the health system, I had a bigger lab and discovered a lot more about leadership and self-definition. And I saw that the really great leaders and the high performers had these characteristics. So when you look at the stress in our world currently, and the chaos and the unrest and the uncertainty, and some of you guys have kids at home that you're trying to figure all of this out, those are chronic stressors. And a chronic stressor is a mismatch between what you have and what you want. So what we have is a pandemic. What we want is for it to go away. You probably have other chronic stressors. And so how we handle that is about our threshold. So what's your threshold? How much stress can you take before you start showing symptoms? And when I say symptoms, I mean physical symptoms, like maybe headaches or muscle tension, other symptoms of stress, or emotional symptoms like anxiety, depression, distress. And so what I noticed this all the time, but what I noticed when the pandemic hit, that some people reached their thresholds right away, and other people have not reached their threshold. The people who reached their threshold right away hadn't learned these skills. The people who haven't reached their threshold, or who hit their threshold but had the skills to come back down, are the ones that have been practicing these things and have learned them somehow throughout their life. So when you hit your threshold, and this is the reason why you need to have these things, is when you hit your threshold and you don't have the skills to bring that back down, what happens is that tension builds and builds and builds until it reaches a point where you either implode or explode. And what I mean by imploding is those are health behaviors, like maybe eating too much for a long period of time, or drinking too much. Suicide would be an imploding kind of behavior, or you explode. And explode would be aggression, it would be violence, and we certainly are seeing that now. And we certainly have seen a lot of people reach their threshold pretty quickly, which has contributed to the chaos and the unrest, in our country. So these skills, these facets, not only determine how we behave individually and how we handle our stress, but it also contributes to the social and emotional undercurrent in our organizations and in all of our systems, our family, work, community, all of that. So it underlies, and that emotional undercurrent underlies any organization's problems, their successes, and their goals, because we all come to work with our bag of stuff, how we handle the emotions, that we're feeling, whether we're comfortable with those emotions, which ones we're comfortable with, our perception of the world, all of that is contributing to that emotional undercurrent that is present in all systems. So we have family and work and community. And so if you look at just the self-calming piece, you see that it's much, much more than just your ability to relax. So you have to look at that self-calming, and you have to understand that anxiety runs through the herd, and so does calmness. And the questions you need to ask yourself is, can you own your own anxiety and not take on the anxiety of others? And that's a tricky one, and then what's your tolerance level for your own anxiety? Increasing your tolerance for your own anxiety can be a gold standard for a thoughtful, self-defined leader or a high performer, especially when they're taking a difficult stand. And then you have to look at, it's more than just calming yourself. It's how long can you stay calm? Do you need to remove yourself to get calm? If you do, then you need to work on that. Do you need others to be calm in order for you to be calm? If so, how can you stay focused on being calm instead of trying to calm others? And it's, can you identify your emotions and this, and remember that anxiety is the symptom of emotions unexpressed. So you have to see what's underneath that anxiety. So there's a lot to every one of these facets. And one thing that we really need to pay attention to is, what created our lens? And I'll give you a hint. Your family had the first shot at it. And our lens determines how we move through the world and how we perceive the world, and our biases and how we see diversity and inclusion. So that's a really important thing to think about. And so when we can see our automatic responses and what contributes to our automatic responses, and our susceptibility to react in predictable ways, and our intensity or investment in a position that may be contributing to the anxiety or the calm of our organizations, these are the things that we all need to be focusing on. And this, I believe that these 10 facets of resilience are our roadmap. So it works like this. If all of us humans worked on ourselves, if we learned to observe our own reactivity and anxiety and worked on self-regulation and that reactivity, if we all practice these 10 facets, if every human defined their guiding principles and lived by them, we would all be happier and healthier, and there'd be a lot less drama and conflict in our lives. And we would have the energy and the creativity to do that important work that we need to do. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Leslie.
Thank you.
Panel.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Moira. It was fantastic to hear from you and have you join our discussion today. I know you're going to come back towards the end of the panel and help us answer a question or two.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so audience, be prepared. If you have questions to ask later, she will be back with us. So thank you again. And it is, well, hello and welcome. It's such a pleasure to be back with all of you. I remember the very first event we ever did with CHIWITCON, and ARA has been a partner since the very first event. I remember moderating an event, and we had Christine Stone, who's now with Groupon. She told us all about Amy Cuddy's power pose, and Sandy Castro, the CEO and founder of IC Stars, was on the panel with us, and she had the entire room stand up and do a power pose. Maybe some of you who are watching here today recall that experience. It was really, really moving. And how powerful would it be to do the same thing here today? Stand up, do our, I guess, virtual power poses in honor of the legendary Ruth Bader Ginsburg. In her honor, I feel like it's very important to read a quote from her. And I'm going to read a quote that she gave during an interview with The Atlantic. And the question she was posed was, what social changes do you think are most important in sensitizing America to the crucial importance of gender equality? And this was RBG's answer. As I said, notorious RBG was created by a second-year law student, determined to use her energy in a productive way. My story is hopeful. It leads one to be optimistic about the future. I have often repeated this question in response. What's the difference between a bookkeeper in the garment district and a Supreme Court justice? 1 generation. My own life bears witness, comparing the opportunities open to my mother and those open to me. The change is exhilarating and it's permanent. We are never going back to the days when women were not seen in decision-making arenas. Thank you, RBG, for everything you did for us. And I am thankful for being here today with you in her honor. And let's get started and dive right in. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the panel to actually do a brief introduction of themselves, maybe share a little bit about their background and why they wanted to join us here today. So we have Leo, you're the first one to enter the room. So I'm going to have you start. Leo Sheridan, who's the CEO and founder of the Advanced Group. Welcome.
Hi, Leslie, thanks. And it was great seeing Moira on the screen there. I think you invited me because I spent some time with Moira earlier this year. She did a kickoff for our leadership team earlier in the year, and it's good to see her face to face. I haven't been able to see her because of the COVID. Anyway, I'm CEO. I started my company back in 1988. We're over 30 years in business. We are Advanced Group consists of four different businesses. One is Advanced Clinical. We do drug development for clinical research, biotech and pharma companies. And the other businesses are our staffing companies, Wonderland, Advanced Resources, and Advanced RPO. Really excited to be part of this panel. I think this is obviously I'm a fan of Moira's in terms of her work, in terms of resiliency and things like that, but also just the idea about women in STEM, and it's a real passion of mine.
Well, we'll learn a little bit more later, Leo, as to why exactly it's a passion of yours and it touches close to you and your family. So thank you for joining us here today. And Melissa Donaldson, SVP and Chief Diversity Officer for Wintrust. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Melissa?
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you all for having me join you today. It's a real pleasure. So welcome, everyone. I have been a senior diversity inclusion practitioner for about 14 years, actually. I am now in financial services. Prior to coming to my current employer, I was leading diversity inclusion practices for Walgreens, and then prior to that, I was actually in tech. I was at CDW and was there for about 13 years. I actually spent the majority of my career in technology in one way or another. So I think through a series of successes as well as setbacks, I learned a lot more about how diversity and inclusion has an impact on how business runs and what is viewed as success. And so here I am after having taken this windy road through sales and professional services and learning and development and training, and now leading diversity and inclusion practices. So I look forward to the conversation.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And thank you. I really respect and admire Wintrust as well. Work closely with them through Chicago Innovation and just appreciate everything they do for the community. So happy to get to know you here today. All right, Aravinda Kilaru is the Senior Director of IT Services and Operations at Foot Locker. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Aravinda.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be and honored to be with you all today. And thank you so much for that honor. And I have been in the IT industry from almost 18 years. And what I love the most is the different aspects of people, from the different countries, different generations, different background, ethnicity, and everything. But the one connect, we are all humans, the human element that comes out of it. And everyone comes with different stories, the powerful of the storytelling, how we can relate, how we can gain confidence, how we can influence, radiant that kind of a trust towards each other. So for me, the diversity, the inclusion, resilience is one of the best, positive psychology traits, if you will, that shaped me who I am today. The positivity that brought out of me as a person made me a better person. So I always love to discuss more and see how we can adapt more in the space.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I love the human element and humanity that you that you are bringing to the table here with us today. Thank you, Aravinda. So what we're going to do is lead you through a guided discussion of questions, and you'll notice the chat is pretty active. So thanks to the ARA team for posting all kinds of articles and links to all of our profiles on LinkedIn. We appreciate it, but we'd love to hear from all of you. So normally I can watch your faces in the audience and kind of ask the questions as we go along. So please feel free, if you hear something that you love, comment on it. If you have something you want to add, please feel free to join in on the conversation. If you have a question, feel free to pose it. I'm going to be monitoring the chat function here, and we'll embed it throughout our discussion. And certainly you can hold questions for the end. Moira will be joining us towards the end as well. So with that, Melissa, I'm going to throw the first question your way. So as Chief Diversity Officer and Director of Diversity and Inclusion Practices for multiple companies, part of your role is to educate business leaders about the benefits of a more inclusive workplace. So over the past few months, we've obviously seen a lot happen, and I'm curious to know how the conversation has shifted. And have you seen the focus kind of about more overt racism to more awareness of microaggressions and implicit bias? How have you seen the conversation change?
Well, it's interesting, Leslie. When I joined Wintrust over 4 years ago, I went in with the intention of ensuring that we create an environment where individuals could feel valued, included, respected, and challenged, et cetera. And a part of that process is having more of a self-awareness as well, similar to what Moira was talking about with respect to knowing who you are and what some of your background is and where your perspective is coming from. And so we've done a lot of work in that regard over the last couple of years with our leadership teams and so forth. So I feel like the education has been there for quite some time. So we haven't necessarily made a hard right turn to all of a sudden start talking about, racism. That said, we are talking more about, let's have an understanding. We're in financial services. Let's have more of an understanding about where some thoughts around inequity and inequality may be coming from as related to the industry that we serve, and how we are able to attract customers to our environment, or frankly, maybe customers make a different decision to work with a different organization. And so the conversation is moving more towards, it's not necessarily about racism and so forth, more of an educational tone, talking about what are some of the historical contexts that are important to be aware of. Last year, in fact, my team worked with our marketing team, and we launched this series called The Fabric of Our Footprint. And it was designed to really break down, we're a community bank and financial services organization. So it was designed to break down each of customer segments from a race and ethnicity standpoint, and talk about some of the historical context as it's related to, banking and financial services. So for example, redlining. There's been a lot of written around, mortgage lending and so forth, and having to do with it. Redlining stemmed from Blacks being steered away from being able to buy homes in certain communities. You can't just say, oh, well, that was yesterday. Understanding that context today and why there are so many people who feel like they have been left out of the financial equation. All of that is sort of the undercurrent. Moira talked about really kind of understanding what's in that foundation. All of that's still sitting there. All of that is still sitting there. And so those are the kinds of conversations we want to continue to promote inside our organization, of course, as well as talking about, talent and those kinds of things. But it's important to get that historical context so that we can understand how best direct our relationships, our products, and our services.
You mentioned something, it's always been there. It doesn't always rise to the top. And certainly I would say in the past few months, it's rising to the top. So I bet as you talk about redlining and different things, that there are people who are crazy enough learning something new, because it isn't something that everyone knows and is aware of in the work that they do. So I love that you're partnering with marketing, building out personas, and really understanding the communities you serve and how you can, serve them well and serve them better. So that's great. Thank you for leading by example there. So Aravinda, for you, I guess going back to what Moira said, 2 of the 10 facets of resilience are optimism and hope. So how optimistic and hopeful are you these days? What's been going on? And I guess what action steps have you put in place personally and professionally just to stay very flexible and future forward in everything that you do?
Absolutely. So how optimistic I am today comparatively like 20 years back, I have matured in a significant level. And because everyone deals with some difficulties in life, whether you like it or not. So one lesson I have learned that matured me and shaped me as a person is setbacks are okay to happen. Things may not go as you expect them to go, which is totally okay. But you need to remind yourself, you are still alive. You are still a wonderful person. There is still value and purpose for your life, no matter what stage of life you are in. Constantly reminding myself, but always never lose hope, because this is a simple setback. You need to rise. You can move on. You can still make certain things happen. You can make a difference in your own life, and set that kind of positive example in other people's life was one of the traits I have cultivated myself to be a better person, because it did not happen the day one or overnight. It took me years to become that kind of a person where I am more resilient, where I can raise from the setbacks comparatively with a much stronger, with a much positive mindset. If it comes to the current situation, and this is scary for everyone, including every one of us from the kid. But as an adult, this is one of the example that I always encourage people. Even though it is scary, you show that strength. We are humans. We will overcome. We will find solutions. And we will turn the page of this book, this chapter, and then you will enter into the next chapter. All you have to do is be patient, be mindful, be include that nature of the gratitude, the thankfulness to still whatever we have as human beings. And then we will find solutions to certain things. May not be immediately, but eventually at some point of time, you need to be optimistic. So it's totally different. How you perceive things is the critical, a key into this one, right? So you can worry completely and imagine the worst that can come out of any situation. But we often forget, we always tend to imagine the worst. Put a full stop, period, then come the other side. Maybe this is for good. Maybe some better things will come out of it. Nowadays, 10 years back comparatively now, we are more socially connected. We are more socially engaging. We are more socially voicing our opinions that really matters, that are shaping the communities and the people's lives. So there is a positivity. So think about the best thing that can possibly happen. Leave the worst thing slowly and steadily. Then another thing is continuously offer the help. Be there, available, talk to the people, not only your team. That is one thing we always do in my team when I'm managing or leading. We connect and then forget about the work for some time. What is happening in your personal lives? If you are storytelling, that is the most powerful thing that you can possibly embrace, right? Storytelling, share certain stories so that you can feel, okay, I am not alone. When you feel I am not alone, that gives you the boost. Okay, I have this entire human race around me. I'm going to win this. So that kind of talks, be out there, be seen, be available. That is how I always encourage. That is how I am handling the situation right now.
Well, apparently Mallory Robertson here says you are still resilient, which I would agree. You can tell just in your tone and your voice. It's almost like you're looking in the mirror at yourself saying, this is going to be okay. I can do this. The strength coming from that. It's so interesting when you talk about future forward. If you think about it, the pandemic forced us to move 10, 20 years ahead on things like remote working or the humanity at work with dogs and kids and family challenges and issues. It's forced upon leaders and CEOs to make changes that were sitting right in front of them, but they were afraid to make or didn't want to move that quickly. to do something that they've had to adapt that future forward state. It's kind of forced us into that. So thank you for the reminder. Yes, Cynthia, we are not alone in this. So, which is great. Why we love having events like these. Okay, so Leo, as CEO at Advanced Group, you brought Dr. Mulhern, Moira, back in to talk to your leadership team. And you mentioned this earlier when you were doing your introduction and thinking that this was one of many reasons we had you join us here today. But you brought her in to talk about the importance of social and emotional leadership as part of your yearly kickoff meeting. Then you reached back out to her during COVID for more advice, which actually ended up turning into a blog series, which we're sharing here today, particularly about being self-aware and the systemic approach to resilience. So with that, can you speak about which facet is most important to you as a business leader and how you're implementing this philosophy in your organization?
Well, first of all, it's great to connect the dots back to our time with Moira earlier in the year. When I first brought her in, just her message and these facets of resiliency, I think it's so important for leadership to be able to understand and create skills in each one of these areas. Never would have thought that we'd be sitting here in a pandemic, a couple months later. And so the fact that she was able to kind of lay the groundwork for us, it was certainly prescient. So, and then, when I circled back with her, it was more conversational in terms of kind of give me an idea of kind of what should we be thinking about and all these things. And that then turned into some topics to share via some blogs as we were thinking about extending that out to our folks. So for me, when I hear you talk, Aravinda, about hope and optimism, I would say certainly those have to be front and center. You have to be optimistic. But then I've also started thinking about kind of what is next that I want to say is really very important. That is really taking care of yourself in this situation. So I think about self-replenishment, exercise and self-care, hardiness. I mean, I have been amazed at watching leaders during this time just continue to move forward and just kill it every single day because they're bringing that energy into the workforce. They're leading by example, and they seem to have the energy and the capacity to continue taking on more. So for me personally, just taking care of yourself, again, that self-awareness, really, really very important. Where do I think I need to be improving, thinking about differently? And then the other topic, which is very important to me and Moira, which is systems thinking, which is we're all interrelated, we're all connected. And the idea of moving into problem solving, what am I doing to contribute to the problem? Those types of discussions took place. And I would just encourage anybody who's interested in systems thinking. It's a fascinating philosophy and overarching philosophy for what we do when we think about leadership at Advanced.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Obviously, there's in the chat a couple people agreeing with you how important self-care is. And again, something just relating back to you, Aravinda, too. It's just being self-aware of your wellness and watching for signs of just taking care of yourself. Your body speaks to you. It tells you these things, and we choose to ignore it sometimes, and we choose to accept it. And we need to accept it more than ignore, especially right now when it would be really easy to lose that hope. But the hope is there. So with that, I guess I want to go back to you, Melissa, and ask you a question. You hold not one, but 2 master's degrees. I'm not sure where you got the time. So speaking of time, was there a time, especially in the type of role you have, when you doubted you were in the right place, or maybe others implied that you were not? How did you overcome those challenges? And we ask these questions because a lot of people listening in during the CHIWITCON events are at stages in their careers where they're ready to take that next leap or that next jump, or asking themselves, am I in the right place? So how did you kind of address that to yourself as you were rising up in your career?
Well, I'll answer your question about the 2 degrees. One was pre-children, one was post-adult children. So and they were 30 years apart, by the way. So it was just one of those things where I felt like there was something else that I wanted to learn, something else that I wanted to do. And so, you asked if I felt like I didn't belong in the room or something like that. You can't see me head to toe right now, but I'm almost 6 feet tall. And there are some people that I imagine would prefer I not come into the room. There are some people that I would imagine feel like that I'm a diversity hire and always have been a diversity hire, right? And so when you talk about systems and systems thinking and talk about reactions to those kinds of things, I can be as pumped up as I want to be. There still may be people in the room who feel like all these things negate any capability that I bring to the table. So that means that I have to make sure that I am not poisoning my own thought process with some of those doubts. I have to strategize around what am I trying to accomplish here and how can I connect with this individual? And then I also have to recognize that there are some people that no matter what I say, they don't want to hear from me. And guess what? I don't need to be there. There are other oceans to swim in. And so I think that is really a big portion of, just how do I settle on the fact that if whether or not I belong in the room, I try not to enter spaces where I don't feel like I have earned or deserve the right to be in a particular kind of room. So I guess if there was a more recent example where I feel like, I'm going to have to work a little bit harder on this one. It's two, actually. One, I shared a little bit about my professional background. I didn't have a long, strong history in financial services and banking at all. And so I make this huge shift over into financial services and everything. I know a ton about diversity and inclusion. I know nothing about banking and financial services other than they exist. So I've got to listen. I've got to listen and absorb what they're telling to me. I've got to respect the history. I've got to be willing to be vulnerable and ask those questions about the things that I don't know and risk potentially embarrassing myself, but all in the spirit of trying to become a better partner and more productive in the role in trying to build basically a practice from scratch. And so that takes a lot of, frankly, energy. But it's also something that I think helps fortify me and prepare for whatever that next sort of leap is. So that's one example. And I do feel like my fellow senior peers, look at me as a peer and will, seek me out for some advice and counsel. And I can also reach out to them for some advice and counsel on some things, and we can work together and very harmoniously. So I'm grateful for that. The other example is when I went back to get my second master's. I went to Northwestern. I was one of 68 people, 68 students that was in the cohort. But guess what? Many of them had just come out of undergraduate. I hadn't been an undergraduate student for 30 years. A lot changes, including how you make a reference, for example. And so there were certainly some individuals who were very sweet and raised really well, who were calling me Miss Melissa and yes, ma'am, and these kinds of things. And I'm not talking about professors. I'm talking about the students. And so it's like, no. I'm here to learn alongside you. I am one of you. Forget the fact that I'm a boomer and you're an X and a Y and whatever else. I'm here as one of you. And so that meant that I couldn't come in and, start throwing around my experience and start throwing around, my wisdom or whatever. I had to engage where they are. I had to meet folks where they are. And that's really kind of how I approach my work as well. Reaching, touching, connecting with people based on where they are and figuring out how we can move forward together. And, I have to say, I have gained some really, really good, much, much younger friends through that entire experiences. So, overcoming doubt is something that, I find that, is an active proposition for me. It's not like, oh, well, what are we going to do today? I go in knowing that based on my experience and my history and my background, I have plenty of stories where individuals did not feel like I belonged in a room. So, you know, both of my children have a son and a daughter. Both of them were athletes. And like I used to tell them, you got to let your game speak. You know, I don't need to talk trash. I just need to show you what I can do.
Right. I love it. You've got game. Let me tell you something, Melissa, just listening to you. And I think about all the leaders out there. You have a presence about you that is extraordinarily like welcoming and inspiring, and just a gifted presence about the way you are. So that, to me, when you think about people you want to lead and learn from, that's super important to be that way. So, and congratulations on the 2 degrees. And actually going back again, we always talk about you can't be what you can't see. And it's really nice to hear your story about what you've become, and it enables and inspires others to see what they can also be, including those thinking about maybe going back to school at this point in their career. It is possible. So you may get some questions about that.
Oh, thank you for that, Leslie. Appreciate it.
All right, Aravinda, I'm going to ask you a question here. As a senior IT director in the retail industry, how have you seen diversity and inclusion really evolve in the past few years? I would say probably even more so in the past few months. Maybe it's even expedited even more. And obviously retail through COVID has completely changed. There are not as many storefronts. A lot of retail brands we've known and loved over the years have closed, but those who are open and active, have you seen more of an effort to address diversity and inclusion? And is it something that you feel, not just in the way they cater to their clients, but from an operations and leadership standpoint, have you noticed it within your own company or the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I have been in the retail industry from last 15 years, and I love what I do. I love what I see for like various reasons. I'll give you a few examples. The diversity inclusion is always there, to Melissa's point. It's not like something that we are starting from the scratch on the day one, like immediately. However, nowadays with this COVID or with this some social unrest, now people are paying more and more attention to the topic, and then utilizing how can we be better people. That is the attention you are getting across the globe, across everyone, every human being. So it is like a much more attention than before. So that is how I see it. If it comes to the overall how retail industry is evolving, every 10 years or 15 years, the trends will change in human lives, whether it is a financial aspect of it, whether it is a human, like a science or anything. Overall 10, 15 years, the trends will be changing. No one ever imagined online business can be an even concept. It can evolve to a greater extent like 20 years back, where we are right now. However, it is impacted like some of the other aspects of the retail business, the brick and mortar stores for sure. At the same time, the people who are coming with innovative ideas, how can I make a difference in the customer? Maybe some virtual snapshot, dressing up yourself in like a technology world. Maybe that is how you are connecting with your customers, one way or the other way. And there are still people who really feels like they need to feel and touch the product. So that the population is still decent population is out there. So you need to pay attention to those customers as well. It's not all 100% online, all 100% brick and mortar. But in my opinion, any company can stand in the long run. The companies who invest in communities, right? End of the day, every business has some motive and more money, be this kind of billionaire kind of company. But how are you investing back into communities is going to speak on behalf of you. How other people, outside people will look at the company. Hey, they are really investing into the markets where youth needed some kind of help. Maybe some minority communities need help. They're offering some kind of educational funds. They are giving foods or donations or anything. End of the day, those are the core values that are eventually make a company stand in the industry for a long time. Because end of the day, no matter what you do, you need to invest yourself, your family, your neighbors into your community, because we are all connected. You are not going to live alone. As a company, you are not going to live alone. You need to spread that goodness around you so that we are going to make it a better world for every one of us. That kind of companies is going to define the a long-term future for them. And especially in the retail, in the pandemic or social unrest or anything, we have received so much attention. But if it comes to the current Foot Locker right now, the leadership has been always taking the diversity at a greater extent, the maturity, the support, because you need everyone from across the globe, every corner to share the ideas to make it better, right? One country, one person, one group, one neighborhood cannot make it happen. We all belong together again, connected together. So yeah, there is a lot of evolution in a positive way.
Right. You're right. Consumers are actually thinking differently about brands and looking into what are they doing within their communities. We're educating ourselves to make sure they treat their employees well and that they are giving back to the community. Melissa, Wintrust's tagline, isn't it Chicago's bank, something like that?
Wisconsin's bank.
And Wisconsin, bring it on Wisconsin. So, it's, but that's important. It speaks volumes to that. And then you have to back that up with action and do things to support the communities that you're in. But the consumer is getting a little bit smarter. They're educating themselves and really making decisions based on that. So I would agree with you. All right, Leo. So you and I have worked together, and I know that you have a very diverse leadership team up into the C-suite. You have a woman as a COO, and your head of marketing is female. You've got plenty of women, very diverse organization, and it's something I've always respected and admired about you. And being an ally, and you also, for me, just speaking from my own experience working with you and why it was important to have you on this panel, you've always lifted me up. Anytime I've reached out to you for help or advice, you've always been right there. Even if it was 10 minutes meeting at a conference, you took the time to do that. So thank you for being an ally and a champion of women and leadership and women in business and just in general. And part of that obviously is just innate and in you. And within ARA, it's something that we always have been adamant about, having men involved in the conversation. Everyone should be part of the conversation. So you've been a long supporter of women in business and tech, and you've been involved in groups such as the Healthcare Business Women's Association. You and I are both part of the Women's Business Collaborative. You are part of the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion. And your daughter is also a recent STEM graduate. So what do you see as a pivotal role that men can play in being better allies to women? And you recently wrote a piece about this that it really struck me. And we'll be sure, again, Allison Kaplan from Team ClearEdge and ARA's posting in here for us in the chat box. But what are some of the things men and all of us can do to support women in technology and beyond?
Well, first of all, I think it does have to come from the head and the heart. And what I mean by this is men really need to understand and have a feeling of deep-seated fairness, right? And that's really, really important. You've got to have that as part of your just belief and that, equality has to happen. And we all are going after the same opportunities, and we should have the equal opportunity to go after them ourselves. So that's the first thing, that sense of fairness. Understanding also that the current structure is that 62% of all management positions are held by men. Okay, so if there's going to be change, it's going to have to be from 62% of what's going out there in terms of influencing that change. So yes, they have to be involved and they have to be partners in what we're trying to do. So it's really important that men do lift people up, women, and help support diversity and inclusion as well as gender parity. I really enjoyed reading McKinsey's article recently about women in the workforce, and they talk about this broken rung. And the broken rung is really, they're doing a good job in terms of getting gender parity at the C-level suite and the higher level management, but we don't have enough women coming into the work environment, moving into management. So if we're really going to influence change, men are going to have to create a way to get women into the entry-level management positions and lift them up over time. And that's the sponsorship. They have to set targets for themselves to make sure that they're in their responsibility and everything else are keeping themselves accountable, achieving those targets. And just as simple as making sure you have diverse slates every single time you're looking at promotions and hiring. So those are some of the things that we're doing internally at Advanced. If I would have to say the thing that's come naturally for us, you can never do enough, right? So you always got to kind of look in the mirror and make sure you're doing better in this situation, because even our statistics, even though they're great, they could be better. And I want to talk about my daughter real quick, and I just simply say, you know, she is she's a math major, and she's a cognitive science minor from Georgetown University, and one of the top schools in the country. And it's shocking to me, someone who's in the profession of jobs and things like that and careers, that that there wasn't a path to a job immediately after college. And so looking at that, I was like shocked. Why isn't, if I look at every business school, they are tracked as freshmen, sophomore, juniors. And by the time they finish their junior summer, they're offered a full-time job at graduation. So that's what's going on in a business world. So what's going on in the women in the STEM community, and particularly women in STEM? And I was just shocked to see that structure is not in place. And so we're trying to do something internally to set something up and solve that problem. But it's an interesting thing that, one, the broken wrong, and two, getting women into work. There's got to be a much more fluid way to make sure that they're tracked early on, they're encouraged to continue, and they graduate, and they're in opportunities right away.
Yep, I agree. Everyone keep an eye out, because Leo puts his mind to something. He definitely excels. And I love that you're partnering with your daughter, Claire, on this initiative to make change, and that you actually pulled some of her friends who are also STEM graduates and heard a similar story. And when I think about ARA, Tractor Teen, and Advanced Women in Tech, we have to do more. When we're attracting them in, we have to figure out ways to welcome them in, retain them, and advance them. So I really applaud you for your efforts. So we'll make sure to share over the ARA networks as that starts to get developed. Moira, welcome back. We're going to do a quick question here for all of you, and we're almost out of time. We're really coming up on time here. So final question for all of our panelists here. Let's return to the title of our session. The road to inclusivity is paved with resilience. Why do you believe that to be the case? And what advice do you have for our attendees today to serve as better allies and spokespeople for change? Moira.
Yeah, and Moira, I'm going to defer all my time to you, because I think you've the best position. Well, yeah, please share the comments around that threshold piece and being able to kind of work on your threshold, and not trying to do that in the middle of a crisis, but actually doing it on a consistent basis. So when you hit a crisis, your threshold is actually at a higher level.
You are absolutely right. It's really hard to learn these concepts when you're in the middle of a crisis. It's best to practice them regularly, but we are in the middle of a pandemic, so please work on them. But I see that we've made a lot of progress in the area of inclusivity, but we have a lot more work to do. So this is a marathon, and it can be a chronic stressor for some. So, and how do you navigate a chronic stressor? Well, you have to have those skills not to reach your threshold, because this is the long haul. So you may be pretty good at these things. If you are, practice, ramp up the things that you're good at. I liked that Leo mentioned self-care. I liked we were talking about optimism and hope. And I loved what Melissa said about history and looking at the histories and what's passed down to us, right? Yeah, that is so important. Passed down in those systems. And so ramp up the things you're good at. Pick one thing that you're not so good at, and practice. And I think it's all about that self-differentiation, self-defining. And I love this Ruth Bader Ginsburg quote, so I'm going to use it. Fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you.
It's one of my absolute favorite quotes. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. All right, Melissa, parting thoughts for us.
Well, this is a big question. Resilience takes courage, and inclusion takes courageous conversations. And, as a Black woman, I feel like a lot of the conversation we have these days is around, you know, this thing, this situation, this disruption is gonna pass. And I'm telling you, it's not. The pandemic, we will get a vaccine and people will go about their lives, but there will be communities that will continue to be disenfranchised in many different ways. And so, you know, some of that history is really important. But again, it gets back to sometimes no matter what I do, Moira, to talk myself up, I'm probably going to have to deal with somebody who would really love to knock me down. And those are the systems that I hope, Leo, you really force your peers and in your work to really look into with respect to what is the biases that are keeping some people out of the equation, right? I wish this was a purely, you know, algorithmic kind of situation, but it's not, you know, and for some, including myself, no matter what I accomplish, I'm still going to have to face down racism and injustice and inequity and inequality. And so it's hard. And so what I would say is that courage on behalf of others would be great. You know, so, you know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's quote, getting others to join you, they've got to be courageous enough to join you as well, even if it's not impacting them personally. And I do think that there is a difference between those things which everyone is going to be impacted by and those things which are viewed as only impacting certain populations. And so those are the things that I really hope that collectively we identify, we fight against those things, we challenge those things. Frankly, we vote down those things so that equality and fairness that you spoke about, Leo, is truly available for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Melissa, thank you for continuing to get up.
I gotta eat, Leslie. I gotta get up so I can eat.
I mean, you got game, so you got to do it. But honestly, I mean this sincerely. We need to see you getting up so we can be like you and others watching you. It's the next generations that we really have to impact the most. And the only way we're going to do that is to show them. As tiring and hard as it is to shoulder it.
Can I just say too, and I apologize, I know you want to move to Aravinda, but I do believe, I am so hopeful that the next generation, and when I say the next generation, I'm really talking about the millennials, the Gen Ys. They're the ones who are forcing their parents to take a look at these things. They're the ones who are also saying, hey, don't you lead people? Don't you run companies? Aren't you a department head? Aren't you an executive? What are you doing? And my own daughter, who, by the way, Leo, she is a finance math person as well. She came out of Howard University, right down the street from Georgetown. And she looked at me and said, what are you doing?
Right.
Right. And so I am so hopeful that it is this generation of emerging leaders and talent and professionals that are going to force the conversation more and more and more and more. So gives me hope, a lot of hope.
Leo, quickly, what would you like to add?
Just work on yourselves. I mean, look at Moira's 10 facets. Spend some time on it. She hit it on the head, which is practice and take care of yourself and get better.
Aravinda.
Yeah, I would like to quickly add, these are wonderful points, and from Moira and Melissa and Leo. One of the things I suggest to the companies or like any institutions, don't do it forcefully to bring some equality because everyone eyes is on you. You make it, you adopt it because you love to make a difference in the world. And every individual is supposed to start with themselves, with their family, with their friends and groups and everything. The equality should start from that top-bottom approach of going all the way. But the only thing is, take the risk of, we always look for the best talent in the country, like anything. We always look for the best. why don't we, as a company, take the risk of finding not so talented people, however, they're very passionate to learn, very passionate to grow up, then hire them and cultivate them, then nurture them and mature them into management. The equality should be risk-taking aspect is not there in my observation in many companies these days. That bothers me, but that should be addressed from the day one from every human being.
Thank you, Aravinda. And panelists, thank you so much. Moira, Melissa, Leo, Aravinda, thank you for joining us. I'm going to have you, I guess, exit at this point. Thank you for being here. I'm going to have you come back. And I just want to leave my parting words with you from Sandy Castrol, who is a dear friend of mine. I used to sit on the board of IC Stars. Love her dearly, and we've been hosting these ARA events called Allyship in Action, and Sandy's given out a couple of quotes. Change happens when we all care, and to Leo's point, it's got to come from the heart. And one of my favorite quotes of hers, the hope needs you. Jane, over to you.
Thanks, Leslie.
And thank you again for having us.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
And those two quotes from Sandy, I still hold so true and so close. So such a great ending from an amazing and fantastic panel and an event. So thank you, Leslie, for your just absolute skill in moderation, but also to all of our panelists, to Moira, Melissa, Aravinda, and Leo. This was a fantastic event, and just really very, very good advice and tactical ideas and tools that we can walk away with and to apply into our lives, giving specifically with the facets from Moira. We'd also like to thank the entire team at CHIWITCON and Inova for including us to participate in this conference, as Leslie mentioned, for the 5th year in a row. We're very proud of that fact and really, really appreciate it. Please be sure to check out our ARA series, as Leslie mentioned. It's called Allyship, Advocacy, and Taking Action. Our 3rd event in the 5-event series is on October 13th at 12 o'clock. It's titled Change Starts at Home. If you've missed any of the first 2 events, you can check out the recaps as well as videos and register for future events on aramentors.com. Please join us for any one of the events, and we thank you again for joining us today. Have a great day.